what I just
we
said?
we couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. So, folks, we've been living in a Zoom room for years, and yet I still can't find the unmute button. I am so sorry. And I see a whole set of reminders to me that I was muted. So let me start over. Thanks for your forbearance. I am Ben Chang, CFR's Vice President of Global Communications and novice at using Zoom. Welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations briefing on the President's upcoming trip to the Middle East. Thank you for joining us for what will be a robust and informative conversation. We have a strong lineup of CFR experts for you today, with one beaming in all the way from Oman. After our experts weigh in, we will take questions for the last 25 minutes of our briefing. Please raise your Zoom hand at that time, unmute yourself, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. A recording will be posted online at the conclusion of this session, and again, this discussion is on the record. CFR seeks to inform the U.S. role in the world and does so through briefings such as this and the up-to-date analysis and resources posted across our channels, including CFR.org and foreignaffairs.com, where you will find policy briefs, special reports, media appearances, foreign affairs articles, and a Rolodex of our expert voices. Please continue to turn to the Council as a resource as we navigate these times and issues going forward. With that, I want to thank my colleague Lauren Potter for organizing this briefing, and I'm going to turn the microphone over, the Zoom microphone, to friend, former and current colleague Farah Pandith to kick things off. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Ben. Good morning to everybody. My name is Farah Pandith. I'm a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator today. We're joined with three CFR experts. Their distinguished biographies can be found at CFR.org. But by way of brief introduction, Elliot Abrams served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor in the administration of George W. Bush, where he supervised U.S. policy in the Middle East for the White House, and a special representative for Iran and Venezuela in the first administration of Donald Trump. Ray Takei served as a senior advisor on Iran at the U.S. Department of State. His areas of specialization are Iran, U.S. foreign policy, and the modern Middle East. And Stephen Cook is an expert on Arab and Turkish politics, as well as U.S. Middle East policy. He is also a columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. And as Ben said, today he is in Oman. And I'm delighted to be able to organize a moderated session in the first 25 minutes or so, and then we will turn to the audience for questions. Elliot, I'd like to start with you. We have seen the president has made the choice again, this time in the second administration, to go to Saudi Arabia. Apparently, it's a hallmark of this president. And he has defined this particular season of his activity as very transactionally oriented. He said he's going to announce something as big as it gets on this trip. It's unclear whether it will be a policy change, a change in an economic deal, or a Trumpian embellishment. I don't know if they're going to be orbs that we're going to see in Saudi Arabia, but if you could speak to this decision to go to Saudi Arabia, what we expect from this component of the trip, and in fact, did the Saudis lobby for him to go to Saudi Arabia first?
Well, thanks, Farah. We should begin by saying he did exactly this 8 years ago. In May 2017, his first foreign trip, while not counting the Pope's funeral, his first foreign trip then and now, Saudi Arabia. It is a different lineup, though. That trip in May 2017 was Saudi Arabia and Israel. This trip is Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, and no Israel. So it's different. I think it is more transactional in the sense that I would expect the announcement to be an economic or financial announcement. Saudi Arabia is not ready to join the Abraham Accords. So he could announce, theoretically, some kind of defense deal with Saudi Arabia. He could announce a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia. Why Saudi Arabia first again? I'm sure the Saudis like being first, and I'm pretty confident they would have asked for it. But I think if you look at it, 2025, the Saudis are the closest of the three to us. The president's relationship with MBS is stronger than his relations with the two other heads of state. The policy of Saudi Arabia is a bit closer now on questions like China. Qatar is pretty controversial for all the money they put into Gaza and for all the money they put into American universities, which is now coming into question. So I think picking Saudi Arabia is the right thing to do because they are the closest to us and in many ways most important of the Gulf countries.
Thank you. And you're setting the stage for the rest of the trip. In going to Saudi, Stephen, I'm curious your take on his choice to go to Saudi Arabia, but I also was wondering if you thought there were going to be any outputs from the GCC meeting in Saudi Arabia. And certainly, Elliot, you can comment on that as well. But Stephen, what does the president want from this visit? I mean, what does he expect to achieve? And also importantly, as we think about this, who's the audience for this trip?
Well, thanks, Farah, and a very good evening to everybody from Muscat, Oman, which is not on the president's itinerary, but is playing a very, very important role in the nuclear talks with Iran and the recent stand down or ceasefire with the Houthis. I think, Farah, I think Elliot was spot on in that the Saudis are the heavyweight in the region that the president is closest to. It is, for lack of a better term, the big dog in the Gulf. And so it would make sense for him to visit Riyadh first. I think what he's clearly looking to get out of this is deals, the announcement of multiple multi-billion-dollar deals. I think the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has already telegraphed that by first announcing that his intention to invest $600 billion into the United States and then up to $1 trillion. I think the Qataris and the Emiratis will also announce those deals. I think, and it's important to recognize that the president's approach to foreign policy is heavily influenced by, for lack of a better term, this kind of his version of economic statecraft, which is to look towards the wealthy states in the Gulf and their very large sovereign wealth funds as sources of investment in the United States. And that's where you get to the audience. The president can announce multiple multi-billion-dollar deals that will benefit the American people. And he wants to communicate to his base and beyond that after years of railing against how America's partners and allies had made suckers of the United States, now America's partners, particularly those in the Gulf, are investing in the United States and consistent with his America First message. I don't think, though, that this meeting will just be about deals. As you mentioned, there is a multilateral component to it. There is a GCC meeting. I think that the GCC leaders are going to want to talk to the president about Syria. They're going to want to get updated on the status of the nuclear negotiations. They're going to want to talk about the Red Sea, and they're going to mostly want to talk about Gaza. I've been in Oman for the past almost week. It is a constant source of discussion among Omani officials and others here. And I think that the administration is prepared to announce something on this. The president made a remark just the other day about getting aid into Gaza. The Palestinians need to be taken care of. And his ambassador in Israel, Mike Huckabee, said today that that there is going to be a new plan on aid to Gaza. The Israelis will not be directly involved in it, and it doesn't matter whether there is combat occurring. So there may be something more on Gaza than people suspect. But I think overall, what people are talking about and the kind of idea that this is really about the president bringing home foreign direct investment and weapon sales is, I think, the top line of this visit. Now, last point, these huge numbers that they're talking about, these things are going to be backloaded. Who knows whether they'll ever actually happen? The region is flooded with agreements and investment agreements that never actually happen. But I think that the president, knowing how he kind of operates, I think that just the idea that he'll be welcomed in clearly an ostentatious manner and there'll be an ostentatious announcements of these deals are good enough, at least for the moment.
Before I get to Ray, Elliot, I wanted to give you a chance to comment on the GCC, but I also was curious what this last point that Stephen made about these grand announcements. I mean, the bigger, the better. In any other administration, everything is baked before you go over overseas. You know what you're going to announce. What is happening behind the scenes over here?
Well, the answer to that is easy. No one has a clue. And if you look at the statements of administration officials, they contradict each other. And they contradict themselves from one day to the next on matters like Iran, which we'll get to soon. Look, when you get an agreement, classic, the trade agreement with the UK, it isn't really an agreement. It's an announcement. The announcement is we're going to have an agreement, and I think we will. But don't ask for the details. When the Saudis announced 600 billion or 800 billion, that's not this week. I mean, that's an investment over time. Now come back in 5 years. 5 years, President Trump will no longer be president. And we can ask how much of it was actually invested. I'm not suggesting it's some kind of trick. I don't think it is. But, you know, if you look at at previous announcements, as Stephen said, sometimes they happen fully and sometimes they happen only in part and very, very slowly.
Yep. Okay. I'd like to, you mentioned Iran, and I want to turn to Ray and ask you about Iran. The Economist this week has an article that leads the headline, Iran's leader hopes America can save his failing regime. He has no choice but to engage with the great Satan. Do you agree with that? And I'm wondering too, just more broadly, where is the relationship between the United States and Iran at this time, not just on the negotiations, but our framing of who they are and what the Trump administration wants?
Sure, thanks very much. I'm not quite sure if the Iranian leadership is looking for America to save the regime as such. These negotiations have been different from previous one only in terms of pace. There's meetings quite regularly, almost every week. The Iranian position remains the same as it was during the Biden administration. They're willing to have what they would call then proximity talks. Today we call them indirect talks. They are willing to talk about transparency measure to build greater degree of international confidence in their nuclear program. And they are willing to talk about enrichment that they're doing, not secession of it. So the Iranian position is fairly consistent. The American positions, there are about 4 so far. There is the Mike Waltz position of total dismantlement. Marco Rubio's position that Iranians should rely on enrichment from abroad, maybe some sort of a regional bank. That proposal was initially offered to the Iranians during the Ford administrations. That's Gerald Ford. It's been rejected then, it's been rejected every day since. Then there are those who say Iran can have some kind of an enrichment. That is what Special Representative Witkoff at various times has suggested. And more recently, Vice President Vance said they can have nuclear civil program and enrichment that's suitable for that. Now, that's 3.67, that's 20% or whatever it is. So the Americans are busy arguing with themselves, and maybe they'll sort that out by the time they get there. But it's unclear what the American position is at this point. There seems to be some kind of a argument about whether Iran can have enrichment, what that looks like. There are a number of concessions that the administration has already made. Number one, the administration began by saying they wish to have direct talks. That has not happened. And also other areas of concern, namely missiles and regional issues, as far as I know, have not been part of these negotiations. So the modality of these negotiations and the agenda sort of has resembled what the Iranians suggested. There was an editorial in one of the Iranian hardline papers associated with the Revolutionary Guards that said the Americans have their foot on the gas pedal, but we have our hands on their steering wheel, so far as the negotiations are concerned. I don't know if that's actually true, but that seems to be the case. Then also it must be suggested, and I'll end on this, there are 3 negotiations taking place. There is a U.S.-Iran dialogue that is taking place. There is another dialogue taking place between the Iranian government and Director General Grossi. And the third one is trying to resume some kind of a dialogue with the Europeans. if there are overlap between all these baskets, but what the Iranian government would like to do is keep all three as separate as possible. So if one track stalls, the impression of overall diplomatic momentum continues. Now, what is the Iranian motivation? I think the Economist headline is misleading. I don't think they're looking for American sanctions relief as a means of saving the economy, although they certainly would like sanctions relief. I think these negotiations are designed to essentially protect the Iranian nuclear program from any form of retaliation during the time of vulnerability. And also, I think now they think they can probably get an agreement that is satisfactory to them and be subject to congressional approval and sanction the way it wasn't in the previous iteration. So now there's a switch from the perspective that let's just drag these negotiations out. Now they're saying we can actually maybe get a deal that the American political system will affirm to some sort of a congressional approbation, quite possibly a treaty process.
Let's talk about that for just a moment, Ray, in terms of the American political system that is churning. There's a huge difference today in the way in which we're thinking about how we negotiate and what we want. I don't want to get political here, but I do want your expertise. We have not had, I mean, Witkoff is not a trained negotiator with one of the most well-polished negotiating teams out there. Are we at a disadvantage because he's the one who's on the ground doing this back and forth first? And then secondly, there's a domestic component to this that the Iranians rightly are looking at. Do you see pressure domestically impacting the way the president is able to get a deal or what he's trying to achieve?
Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister who's conducting these negotiations, is the most experienced diplomat dealing with the Iranian nuclear issue on the planet. He's been dealing with it for 20 some odd years. His deputy, Ravanchi, has been dealing with this issue. So they're like the Rolling Stone. They have the same lineup. They show up every day and sing, I can't get no satisfaction. They're just doing their thing. The American position seems bewildered. Now, whether that's because of staffing issues or whatever, or absence of a consensus within the regime, within the government, I don't know. In terms of the domestic politics of the United States and whether an agreement with Iran negotiated by this administration can be subject to acceptance by both parties. And we've been talking about this. I suspect my answer is yes. The Trump administration can get away with parameters that maybe other administrations think they cannot get away with. I would have to say that I think the Obama administration that pressed for the JCPOA wasn't that concerned with congressional approbation either. And they didn't necessarily tailor their negotiating position to fit the domestic concern, even the concerns of the Democratic Party caucus on the Hill, which prior to the JCPOA had taken a position of zero enrichment, basically in a variety of sanctions resolutions. So, you know, does this administration have greater leeway? I suspect that's true, but it remains to be seen.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes before we turn to questions. So for those who are listening, get your questions ready. And I have two questions that I still want to ask before we get to that section. Can we please turn to the Red Sea, if we're still calling it the Red Sea? It may be another color by tomorrow. I don't know. Stephen, can we talk about the Houthis, please? I'm curious, you know, all of this back and forth in the last few days. Give us your perspective on what's happening and what you think is going to stick.
Yeah, I think that what has happened is the administration offered the Houthis a deal here. Stop shooting at us. We'll stop shooting at you. You stop shooting at us. And the Houthis said, okay. I think there is, at least the signals that I'm picking up here in Muscat is that although most people would say, you know, the Iranians don't have the kind of influence with the Houthis that, you know, they had obviously with Hezbollah or Hamas or other members of the Axis of Resistance. The signals that I'm picking up here in Muscat is that the Iranians did suggest to the Houthis that they would like a better atmosphere for negotiations with the United States. And that's why the Houthis have stood down, and in turn, the United States has stood down. This has had maybe a salutary effect on freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, which is freedom of navigation is a global interest of the United States. But what's left hanging out there is the Houthi threat to Israel. And I suspect one of the reasons why the Biden administration did not go for this kind of deal is because it has left the Israelis out. And just today, the Houthis fired yet another ballistic missile at Israel, and a U.S. THAAD system shot it down. We saw Israel's spectacular raid on the airport in Sana'a, and I would expect that we'll see something like that again if the United States is going to have a deal, if the Trump administration is going to have a deal with the Houthis that leaves the Israelis out. The Israelis are going to be clear that they're not bound by it. They're unlikely to do that while the president is in the region. And we'll have to see whether the Houthis really stick to this. People forget, and there's a collective case of amnesia here in Muscat. They link the threat to shipping in the Red Sea directly to the situation in Gaza, forgetting that the Houthis did attack commercial shipping in the Red Sea before October 7th and the Hamas attack on Israel. The pace of those attacks were significantly less than what they have been. So the Houthis may or may not adhere to this. At least for the moment, they seem to be suggesting that they will, but maybe they won't. That they weren't defeated, the kinds of thing, answering back at what the Trump administration had said to them. I do want to point out one other thing at the risk of taking up a little bit more time. It's interesting how deeply involved in this the Omanis have been in sort of pushing the administration and pushing the Houthis. This is the role that Muscat has really carved out for itself over many, many years. But I think that it's something that the Trump administration is doing with all the Gulf states. I know I meant in your answer to your first question, Farah, there was a lot of discussion about the big sovereign wealth funds of the region. But think about it. The Saudis are playing a role in mediating with the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Emiratis have been instrumental in bringing Americans wrongfully imprisoned in Russia home. The Qataris obviously have had this big role to play in Gaza and trying to get to a ceasefire there. And now you have the Omanis who are deeply involved in not only the nuclear negotiations, but also the Houthis. It seems that the Trump administration sees America's partners in the Gulf as the kind of trusted interlocutors, not treaty allies in Europe or other partners. And it is a different look for American foreign policy to go to these Gulf states as mediators on issues both within the region and beyond.
It's a really excellent point. I thank you for raising it, Stephen. Elliot, can we turn to Israel before we close this portion of our session together? Are we supposed to make something out of the fact that the president is not going to Israel? Should we be concerned about what the press is reporting as a fraying of a relationship between the president and Netanyahu? What's your take?
A short answer, yes. That is, he could have gone to Israel. He did last time. Hegseth was going to go to Israel. That trip is now off. Ron Dermer was in Washington this week, for one thing, to talk about being, frankly, left hanging by the U.S. deal with the Houthis. So I think there's some tension here. The Israelis worry that the Houthi deal is a model for an Iran deal that also leaves them hanging. And of course, they worry about Gaza and what the American position will evolve into. And they know that the president is going to be spending a week in the Gulf hearing about Gaza, 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 Gaza every day. So it's not the best moment in U.S.-Israel or Trump-Israel relations.
We have to turn to questions, and I'm going to go over to Monica in a moment, but just very, very quickly, I'd like to hear from all three of you. This is a short, it feels to me that this is a short-term set of impacts that we're going to see in the Middle East and not a larger strategy for the U.S. in the Middle East. Is that right? I just want your take on the big picture of what's happening. Ray, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Elliot and Stephen, and then go to questions, please.
I suspect that's correct. One of the issues is these negotiations that are taking place, whether on the nuclear issue or others, are protracted and prolonged. They take a lot of time and effort. And one of the things about the administration, it has these compressed deadlines, and then they get tired of it and move on, like the Ukraine negotiation. So there's a danger of lack of attention to what is inevitably going to be a prolonged process.
Yep.
Um,
Elliot.
yeah, I agree with that. And I think I think it was Ray who used the word, maybe it was you who used the word staffing. I think that's a problem too. To have that kind of longer term policy, you need a staff who's doing that thinking with the principals. I think if you look at the NSC today, DOD today, state today, they're shorthanded. And the lead on these negotiations, Mr. Witkoff, is someone with no background in such negotiations or in the region, except in his business. So I think that's going to be an increasingly difficult problem.
Yep. And Stephen.
And just very quickly, I think the sense that there's these pieces that the president is negotiating don't really fit together, and that his priority really is essentially domestic focus, securing agreements to invest in the United States, would suggest that regionally the president would like these issues to go away, and that's why he has these compressed timelines. He doesn't want to focus on them.
Thank you so much. Monica, can I turn to you to help with the questions, please?
Thank you, Farah. And to ask a question, please click on the raise hand icon on your Zoom window. When you're called on, please accept the unmute now prompt, then proceed with your name and affiliation, followed by your question. And we'll take the first question from Gideon Rose.
Hi, guys. Great discussion. Thank you. Gideon Rose, Council on Foreign Relations at American Academy in Berlin. For most of our careers, this picks up on what you guys were saying. For most of our careers, U.S. policy towards the Middle East, there was the U.S., a kind of liberal hegemon trying to move the region towards something. There was Israel, our sort of sometimes difficult democratic ally, but a key player. And there were the various Middle East authoritarian regimes. And the question was, how did you negotiate all that and bring everything together towards some framework? It seems to me that with the Trump administration and with democratic backsliding in both Israel and the U.S. in general, the way you guys were talking, there is no real difference among any of the players. Essentially, we're in realist world, and the only question is who has how much power and what deal can be cut. But it seems to me like Israeli and American exceptionalism, which used to be part of what the discussions of Middle East policy was, is no longer an issue. And it's all just what deals can people make on what realist basis? Am I wrong on that?
Great question. Who wants to answer?
Well, I think the Trump administration in term one, had an overarching view of the region, which was the Abraham Accords, which really covered a lot of territory and would have had an enormous impact had the Saudis joined. They don't have a theory of the case now because the Abraham Accords are kind of marginalized by the war in Gaza. But I think when you have seen what the Israelis have achieved with respect to Hamas, Hezbollah, Assad, and the attacks on Iran, Israeli exceptionalism is looking pretty good for the moment.
Let me just quickly pick up on that. I think, Gideon, you're right. It's whatever deals, and that's being led by the hegemon, the United States, looking for deals, regardless of what the opportunities there are actually to take advantage of those changes that the force of Israeli arms have made in the region. There is a real opportunity here, but the Trump administration in no way, shape, or form wants to push it because it's not interested in reshaping the region. And so it's perfectly willing to cut deals with the Iranians, thereby extending the life of the regime. I think here's where I put it, and I'll end here. The Israelis have wanted victory, and the United States wants deals.
Great. I'm going to push us along because there are a lot of questions. Monica, if we can take the next one, please. And please make sure the questions are short. Thank you.
We'll take the next question from Christopher Ish.
Hi,
Good
Chris.
afternoon, folks. This is Chris Isham speaking, CT Group. A question about some of these, speaking of deals. One of the deals on the table potentially is a number of the sale of advanced semiconductor chips to Gulf states. They're eager, obviously, they're building up their AI capacity, and they're eager to import advanced U.S. semiconductor chips. Any view on whether you think the administration is on the cusp of raising the current restrictions on those chips or not?
Who would like to answer?
I would say all I have to say, this is going to be subject of discussions, of course. There is an AI war and war over data centers happening here in the region. Everybody's appealing to the big AI players that they can have data centers. Energy is cheap here, land is abundant, but part of that is that they also want advanced chips to advance their own efforts in AI. Whether they'll, I think I don't see a lot of resistance to that, to be completely honest with you, as long as the United States gets some sort of assurances with regard to China. And we see that with the deal that they struck with the UAE. We see that with the efforts on the part of the Biden administration in its what has been termed as a security pact, which was much, much more. And that involved advanced technologies as well. So I don't think that I don't think the Trump administration is averse to this, as long as they get assurances on the Chinese presence and what these countries are going to do with the Chinese going forward.
Thanks, Stephen. Monica, next question, please.
We'll take the next question from Laura Rosen.
Hi,
Thank
Laura.
you so much for doing this. It's a great panel. I don't know who wants to take this, if anyone, but it's about the Trump administration staffing. And, we saw reports that Waltz got pushed out in part over perceived Trump frustration with his allegedly having coordinated with the Israelis, leaning towards a military action on Iran as opposed to a deal. And with Witkoff, you see Trump using Witkoff for the Iran deal, partly because he doesn't seem to trust more, traditional Republican advisors to get the solution he wants. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? About almost, it seems like Trump's using. I don't know. Anyhow, if you have thoughts on that, he seems to have pushed out kind of traditional Republican advisors, and that partly seems why they have a staffing shortage. And they, the people, the career people in the department, a lot of them worked on the deals under the Obama administration. So it seems like they, is it this basically Trump cover for basically Obama type deal? Or anyhow, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Laura. Ella, do you want to take
Well,
that?
there's two separate questions here, I think. One, the staffing, I think that's right. Trump, when he came in the first time, had no people, really. So he had all the generals and he had people from previous Republican administrations. It's different now. That's not happening. And he's brought in some of his own people, Witkoff is an example, and excluded many people, many Republicans from the administration, which creates a problem at NSC, at state, and at DOD on staffing. Now, is he going to end up with JCPOA 2? Maybe. If you think of his denunciations of NAFTA, then they renegotiated the MCA, which is not night and day different. It's better, but it's not night and day. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that, a deal that looks a lot like the JCPOA, but it's 25 years, not 15. The president is going to need some provisions on which he can hang his hat and claim, no, this is completely different. Whether it'll be different, again, assuming there is a deal, that's a different question. And the enemy gets a vote. I mean, would the Iranians agree to a very different deal?
I'll just say one thing. There's one thing about this. I don't think there's a JCPOA 2 coming along. I think you may have series of interim agreements that deal with aspects of the program, but not the kind of a totality of it. There's been a lot of discussions, I think rather correct one, about the Iranian vulnerabilities as indicated by Israeli successes. Those vulnerabilities and Israeli successes have not translated into different negotiating positions by the Iranians. So whatever, again, do they see their vulnerabilities and requiring to adjust their nuclear negotiation? At this point, that is not the case. So I don't think they're going to agree to another 15, 20-year sunset deal or whatever it is. But I think you can get an agreement on 60% this and that and so forth, or something with the Director General Grossi and so forth. And this itself will take 2-3 years to negotiate.
Thank you.
Let me just quickly,
Stephen,
Farah,
yes.
if you don't mind.
No, please.
I know that when Waltz was pushed out, and why he was pushed out, I'm not sure anybody really knows for sure. There was sort of like a disturbance in the force in Washington. Everybody kind of could, and then the parlor games began. Who's going to be the next national security advisor? It's not obvious to me that the president wants or needs a national security advisor. He's got his golf partner and real estate executive Steve Witkoff, who has essentially been the national security advisor. Doesn't seem like either the president or Witkoff need a lot of preparation and think that they can do a deal very quickly. And whether it is incrementally better than a JCPOA or not, they will sell it that way, because that is the way he goes about it. I will say this, just to Ray's last point. Here in Muscat, there's a general sense that there is going to be a deal, and that they're pretty bullish on it, and see the speed with which this is happening as an indication that both parties are eager to have a deal.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, just for everybody to know. Monica, if we could take the last question, please.
We'll take the next question from Trudy Rubin.
Hello, everyone. Do you think, given what we see with this trip, that the idea of a deal in Gaza is finished? And can the Saudis go along with that? And if it's finished and Netanyahu and his far-right ministers can go along in their current direction, what happens then? Because the population squeeze there and the humanitarian issue is getting so dire that it looks like something has to explode. And if there's no political horizon out there, just half-baked ideas of food distribution, when does this thing blow up?
Thank you so much, Judy.
Yeah. I'd say I don't think it's going to blow up for political reasons. I think there's going to be a deal on food. There are news stories today about David Beasley, former head of the World Food Program, leading a kind of international effort that the United States would support, that would arrange for food deliveries into Gaza that would be protected by private security companies. There are many ways of doing it. I think my criticism would be that since October 7th, the United States under Biden and Trump has really not put forward a workable plan for Gaza, which we could have done and should have done. Now maybe there is one, whether it's going to be called an American plan or not. I think there will be some kind of international humanitarian effort. The problem with that effort is it doesn't address the security problem. It addresses the problem of security for food deliveries, but not the overall Gaza security problem, which is landing in the lap of the Israelis, partly because nobody else really wants to take the responsibility and risk of taking it on.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on this?
Well, just that just that it clearly, when the president responded to a reporter's question the other day about this issue, it wasn't just a kind of off the cuff, yes, we need to do something for the Palestinians. The United States is actually engaged in this issue. But the providing aid to Gaza is important, but it doesn't, as Elliot said, to underline his point, doesn't address the underlying issue. And it seems to me that without a plan, the Israelis are going to undertake their own plan, which is to put as much pressure on Hamas as possible. And that includes taking territory now.
Great. I'm going to ask Monica for another question, please.
We will continue to take 1 to 2 more questions. We'll take the next question from Ira Stoll.
Hi, thanks. Is there any chance the Saudis or the UAE might be, Ira Stoll from the editors, any chance the Saudis or the UAE might be able to talk Trump out of a bad Iran deal? I mean, after all, they don't want sanctions off Iran and an enriched Shiite troublemaker across the Gulf from them pumping oil and lowering their prices? Or
Thank you. Ray, do you want to?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, Stephen can speak about this because he's in the region. There is a Gulf rapprochement with Iran. The Saudis are doing it and others are doing it. Now, that may be because they anticipate that there's going to be an American opening to Iran and they don't want to get in front of it or behind it or left behind as a result of it. Was President Trump listening to the Saudis on this? Yeah. I mean, I have no idea. But the other side of the Gulf seems to be in a more of an accommodationist mood at this point, at least in terms of their diplomatic outreach. The Saudi defense minister was in Iran and actually had a meeting with Ali Khamenei. So there's a movement on that place, which may be their perception of American wobbliness.
Yeah, there's been a very significant rapprochement between the UAE and Iran. The Emiratis have invested a lot in Iran. Same thing with the Saudis, and more to come. I think that those countries believe that there's less neuralgia about a nuclear deal now, although there still is concern about sanctions relief and where it will go. But after the damage done to Hamas, Hezbollah, not as much to the Houthis, they're hoping for more, and other components of the axis of resistance, it's the sanctions relief is less of a concern to them. But that's not to say it's not. But I agree with Ray. The president has come to office determined to get a deal with the Iranians. And Elliot has explained time and again from his perspective, from the Trump's first administration, that he was determined to get a deal. Maximum pressure was intended to bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table. So regardless of what the Saudis and Emiratis might be telling the president and the people around him, I think that the president has made the decision that that's what he wants to do.
Monica, we can take another one.
We'll take the next question from Tom Canton.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this superb program. Hopefully you can hear me. I wonder if you could talk about what is really going on in U.S.-Israeli relations right now. How much of a breach is there? And as a result of it, how successful can Trump be in putting pressure on Israel vis-a-vis Gaza?
Who would like
I'll
to
take a crack. I wouldn't call it a breach. I think tensions rise and fall under every president, literally every president. There's a concentration now because there may be disagreements about Gaza and Iran, particularly, and the Houthis at exactly the same time. On Gaza, the United States can exercise pressure, but as with any of these countries, no regime, no administration, no government is going to commit suicide because the president asks them to. And Netanyahu is not going to do things for Gaza or about Gaza that he believes will bring his government down. So this may be a moment of tension. If we have a way of getting food in, they'll accept that as, a fine thing to do. I think they don't view Gaza as existential. They view Iran as existential, and they're trying to keep their eye on that ball.
Stephen or Ray, do you want to say anything on this question? I'm going to turn it to Monica, but I'm also going to thank everybody. I'm going to be jumping off quietly, and Ben is going to take my place. So Monica, please take the next question.
Thanks, Farah. Good to see you.
We'll take the next question from Dr. Azak Karam.
Hello, greetings to all. Thank you very much for an excellent panel. I'm Azza Karam. I'm President and CEO of Lead Integrity, which is a global policy think tank and consultancy. I'm based right now, for the time being, in Cairo for the next few weeks, and I've been following events very carefully. I'm curious as to two things. One is your opinion on the position of Egypt vis-a-vis what you've been mentioning. There's been a heavy emphasis, obviously, on the Gulf for good reason, but I'm curious how you see the role of the Egyptian government. in the midst of all this. But I'm also keen to just, in addition to thanking and emphasizing, just a point that Stephen made about the Houthis seeming to have a collective amnesia about what they're doing. I think it's much more smart than that. I think it's about also rephrasing actions for non-state actors in the region in terms of Gaza and the implications of Gaza. So it's a strategic rephrasing, obviously to their own advantage, not so much an amnesia. Thank you.
I'll take both questions. When I was talking about a collective amnesia, I wasn't talking about the Houthis. I was talking about my Omani interlocutors in particular, who had forgotten about the attacks on shipping prior to October 7th. Of course, the Houthis know exactly what they're doing, and they're not engaged in any kind of amnesia. On Cairo, look, there is clearly a reason why the president is not going to Egypt. There has been a significant power shift in the region that has been underway for the better part of the last decade, especially as Egypt has lurched from crisis to crisis as its economy has deteriorated because of the bad decisions of its leadership. Is that Egypt is always going to be very, very important, but it really is unable to project power. And the one issue that is left for the Egyptians, which is Gaza, in negotiating a ceasefire, the Egyptians have been left with the short straw. They're the ones who are supposed to wrangle Hamas in Gaza and get them to agree. That is probably the worst job among many terrible jobs in the Middle East. And so the Egyptians really don't have a role to play in the nuclear negotiations. One would think that they would be more concerned and more active on the Houthi front, given the fact that the Houthis' ability to close the Red Sea has a very significant impact on Suez Canal tolls. But they too have amnesia. They have blamed, they have said that the problems in the Red Sea fall squarely on the shoulders of the Israelis. So Egypt is, now sitting on the sidelines and is observing what's happening in the region rather than shaping the region, as Egyptians like to tell themselves that they do.
Thanks, Stephen. Monica, we'll take one last question.
We'll take the last question from Bernard Heikel.
Hi, Bernard Hakel, Princeton University. Thank you very much for your comments. I just wanted to ask one question and make one comment. I think the comment and the reason for the détente between the Gulf countries and Iran has to do with the fact that Iran's ability to hit the Gulf countries, its power in the Persian Gulf is undiminished. And in an attack on Iran that is existentially threatening to the regime, the Iranians will attack Saudi Arabia and the UAE and have made that intention very clear, which is why they have, which is why the Saudis now want the Iranians, a deal with the Iranians. The question has to do with oil. I didn't hear you talk about oil at all with this, with the trip. Do you think that energy and oil has factors at all in this presidential visit to the Gulf?
Well, I think certainly the amount of pumping that the Saudis are doing is going to come up. And the Saudis, as you well know, Bernie, don't do very well when oil is selling at $60 or $70 a barrel. They need significantly more than that to balance their budget. So I would imagine, I was going to say oil supplies are likely to come up. You never quite know, I would say, with this administration. Who is going with the president on this trip? Will he have the Treasury Secretary or, the Secretary of Energy or Secretary of the Interior? Who will, from our point of view, who is going to raise this? I think from the president's point of view, he'll say some things about how we don't need anybody's oil and we're the greatest producer. But he wants oil prices to remain low. He needs them to remain low because if he's going to be imposing significant tariffs with a risk of inflation, he doesn't want oil prices rising in the same time period.
Of course, it's a double-edged sword for him, as well as for the Saudis. The Saudis can capture market share with low oil prices. They'll never make up in market share what they need in high oil prices, but it does have an impact on American producers and those Americans employed in the oil patch. So it is a double-edged sword for him to demand these low oil prices. I put the Saudi pumping in the category of one, capturing market share, doing damage to the American industry, but also doing Trump a favor so that when there is tension, if there should be tension between the kingdom and the Trump administration, the Saudis will be somewhat insulated from it by doing a variety of solids for the president early on in his administration.
All right, with that, unless another panelist wants to weigh in, let me thank everyone for attending this briefing to preview the president's trip to the Middle East. To our panelists, thank you for your time, wisdom, and insights. To our attendees, please continue to tune in to CFR events and go to cfr.org for resources on these issues and many more. Everyone have a good rest of your day. Stephen, safe travels, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it unprecedented for a president to have two non-consecutive terms? No. Grover Cleveland did it. Is it unprecedented for a president to try to do a colossal number of things via executive orders in the first 100 days of his presidency? No. FDR did it. And I could go on. I think the problem about the word unprecedented is it's code for I don't know any history. And that's why you hear it a lot on the media. But to me, the striking thing about what we're seeing is that not only have we seen Donald Trump as president before, we've also seen other presidents attempt these sorts of things before. In particular, it seems to me that the project of a greatly enhanced presidential power is far from new. I mean, it's just a little over 50 years ago the imperial president, the imperial presidency was a phrase much in use as Richard Nixon approached the height of his power. So I'm struggling, in fact, to find the unprecedented here. Part of the problem in academia is that people find it very hard to recognize how much of Trump is a familiar part of American history, particularly the history of American populism. And the notion, which now goes back all the way to the beginning of his first term, that he's somehow related to interwar fascists in Europe, it just won't go away. People will still keep writing the Trump is Hitler op-ed. There's a market for that clearly persists. But this, I think, is just a huge category error. Trump's in a tradition of 19th century political ideas. The unusual thing is to have a populist who gets elected twice to the presidency. But even then, it's hard to find anything here that's entirely novel.
President Xi Jinping, he spent his whole career preparing himself and perhaps preparing the Chinese political economic system for exactly this moment. Since he took power in 2013, he has been talking a lot about the unseen changes in the international system. He also talked about the need to resist the foreign coercion and never again being bullied by foreigners. So a lot of ways, he and his generation is very well prepared for exactly this moment. I do think that China actually has a lot of flexibility as well. We tend to focus a lot on President Trump. He can just snap his finger and change his mind, and nobody's going to care about it. That's just his style. But in fact, I would say China also has a good track record, in fact, of quickly walking back some of these policies, or that's how they overnight stopped the Cultural Revolution and quickly stopped the sudden exit of COVID would be the latest example. And on top of that, the party controls the media, so they can always put a positive spin, even if assuming that President Xi Jinping is going to pick up the phone and call President Trump and offer President Trump some way to claim victory. They have the capacity to do that. But the intention, as well as the knowing the fact that rising tariffs is going to hurt Chinese export, especially the small and medium-sized companies, leading to other ripple effect, deflation on unemployment. So I would say they don't want to have a trade war. They have the intention to de-escalate. But I think right now, given that the working level conversation has not get started, like in the United States, the new administration, undersecretaries, assistant secretaries are still not yet confirmed. So I think it probably takes time. Whether this is going to take 90 days or shorter, I don't know. But I do think China has the flexibility, like just thinking about the past track record, thinking about how they can put a positive spin through the media. I think they would change course overnight, if there is a way.
You could start seeing prices creep up very soon. And for those types of industries or those types of products where they really are concentrated today in China, you could see a jump fairly quickly. In terms of the absorption of the tariff, the answer is it depends. I think it's impossible to absorb 125% tariff, right? That is not going to happen. And we've already seen, and the Chinese government is not happy about, having to absorb it. We've seen already conversations with Walmart and the like pressuring their Chinese suppliers. So that is just not absorbable. What you can do in certain goods is move potentially to other markets. And if other markets have a 10% tariff, that potentially is more absorbable. So I think it really depends on various things. It's also, certain supply chains take a long time to move. So if you want to, relocate car parts or car plants, that's going to take anywhere between 2 and 5 years to move. If you have an apparel supply chain, you could actually do that in 6 months. But you're not going to begin to move those until you actually know what the tariffs are, because you would hate to move an apparel supply chain out of China, where it's 125%, into Vietnam, and perhaps, 90 days, those tariffs go back up and you're paying over 40%. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. So I think there's going to be a paralysis for a bit until you sort of see what shakes out. Though countries that got either, Mexico or Canada that got 0 on USMCA compliant goods, or countries that just got a 10% universal tariff, those do look somewhat more attractive over the next months, especially for supply chains that are a little bit more fluid and just the capital costs and the investment are a bit easier to move. So that's a very long way of saying, we will start to see some prices pretty quickly. There may also be, the retailer that you're going to may decide, I'm not going to wait 6 weeks. I have inventory right now. I brought some in over the last, 6 weeks. I'm going to begin to increase those prices because what's coming is going to be a lot more. And so I want to increase my prices. If it's going to be a 10% hit, I might increase it 5%, or I might just increase it even more, especially if I think the next round is coming in from China, or maybe won't come in at all. So I do think there's a lot of fluidity here, but it is going to be a significant shift in terms of what we see on store shelves and the like. And, China's strategy over the last 6 to 8 years has been to pull back its importance or the U.S. economy's importance for its exports. So you see, you look back, 8 years ago and China was, 20, almost 25% of U.S. imports from any country. They were a big part of it. Today, they're 13, 14%. So they've pulled back. But if we see a real stop, which, 100+% tariffs would suggest, that will be particularly important in sectors where there still is a big concentration. So that is, lots of electronics, your iPhones and other electronics. That is toys, that is shoes, that is some apparel. There's a number of industries where, you're going to go to your Walmart, your Target, your Best Buy, and you're either not going to see products, or the products you're going to see are much, much more expensive than they have been, because it does take time. It takes time just to bring sources from other places to sort of get those orders and get them on ships or planes to here. But it really takes time in reordering the supply chains to actually source from other places that are not coming out of China or touching on China. And the last thing I'll say here is we still don't know what tariffs are actually going to be put in place. So we have a halt on a lot of tariffs for 90 days, but no one really rethinks their supply chains over 90 days. So they're going to wait to see what happens then before they start thinking about where they might put investment, where they might look for new contractors, new suppliers, and sourcing, even in some types of supply chains that are faster to move than others.
I am impressed. We have great turnout for the last session of the day. Please give all of yourselves a round of applause. And I see David Big.
Security Advisor for International Economic Affairs and currently President of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Froman, thanks for being with us here. Very different times when you were the trade representative, when we were talking about trade deals between the EU and the US, transatlantic deals and so on. What do you make of what you've heard from President Trump there? What is that going to mean?
Well, he has been quite interested in tariffs for a very long time, long before he was involved in American politics. And this is consistent with his view that if we raise tariffs, it will force companies to move their production and their supply chains to the